In 1882, Congress passed the first immigration law in American history, and it barred the immigration of Chinese laborers. It's commonly called the Chinese Exclusion Act. That is, it's called the Chinese Exclusion Act in textbooks. And it's in every textbook of American history that covers the 1880s. So every broad survey has coverage on the Chinese Exclusion Act. I've had a number of students read newspapers from that period, and it's not covered. It's just not in there at all. It didn't seem to be a big deal. It wasn't much of a story. Okay, the reason I say all this is by preface to having to confess that I have no idea what the historical significance of Barack Obama's presidency is going to be. Now, I can say this. I do know that, well, if he does nothing else in his presidency, if his first term proves to be a flop and he's not reelected, then the line in the history books about him will be first African-American president. And that's historic right there. So he's already carved out a niche in history. But of course, he has, I hope, and I certainly think, much grander ambitions. He wants to be a great president. I think, well, I don't know this for a fact, but I have a hunch that nearly every president wants to be a great president. The one possible exception that comes immediately to their mind might be Gerald Ford, who was at least, he came into the office differently than other presidents. People who get elected president, they have to at some point think, I'm pretty much the best thing going. And that's why people should vote for me. Now, actually, I say that only half flippantly. Because when I say the best thing going, in addition to teaching my undergraduates, I often teach, or at least, I don't exactly teach, I speak to a group of, do they have Boys State and Girls State in Michigan? Yeah. Okay, so these are high school students who have an interest in politics. And they come to, in Texas, they come to Austin, the state capital. And they create this sort of shadow or mock government. And these are the kids who really take politics seriously. And when they come to Austin, I talk to them pretty much every year. And I ask a question of them, but I also ask to my own undergraduates. I ask them, how many of you want to be president someday? Now, I teach an undergraduate class at the University of Texas about this size. And in a group this size of, what are there, 250 people in here or so? Roughly, okay. I'll bet not 4 or 5 people will raise their hand. Young undergraduates will raise their hand. And those who do are usually kind of looking around as if, are people going to think that I'm really impressed with myself if I raise my hand? And I say, come on, be honest. And maybe I get a couple more hands up, but no more than that. When I ask the question to the boys' state and the girls' state, 3/4 of the group, they raise their hand. But I tell my students, and I tell them, you might think that putting yourself up to be president, or at least announcing that you're going to run for president, would betray a real kind of, grandiosity in your personality, maybe even something approaching hubris. Well, except it might. It might if you thought that announcing for the presidency somehow was an indication that you thought you had all the qualifications necessary to be president. And it's a daunting office. And there's nobody who has all the skills, all the talents, all the experience required to do the job really right. But that's not the question. The question always comes down to, am I better qualified than those other people who are running? And that's a comparative question that all sorts of people answer in the affirmative, if you consider all the people who run for president. Anyway, so Barack Obama in history. How many of you watched or listened to the inaugural address? Okay, it really was a historic moment. And as you know, there were millions of people on the Mall in Washington who wanted to be part of that particular experience. I was listening to it sort of with the eye and the ear of a presidential historian. And in part because I've been asked to do a comment on the inaugural address by ABC News. And we were going to do an interview afterwards, so I was going to listen very carefully and try to come up with something insightful to say. But I had to tell them that the address was going to occur during one of my classes. January 20th was the first day of class in the spring semester at the University of Texas. And my class, my freshman class, meets at 11 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. Now 11 Central, 12 Eastern. So as we were having our very first class, Barack Obama was being sworn in for the presidency at this extremely historic moment. And one of my enterprising or bold students emailed me in advance saying, Professor Brands, I really want to see the inaugural address. Why don't you call off class so we can watch it at home? Well, I've heard that one before. So I said, no, we're all going to watch it in class. Now, I'm not sure how this auditorium is wired up, but the classrooms at the University of Texas are all wired for the internet. And so there's a screen with an internet projector and all this. And I first thought that, okay, what we'll do is we'll watch it on the internet, because I knew that CNN.com was going to have a live video internet feed and so on. So I thought that would be good. And I was all set to do it. But then at the last minute, I thought, you know, this is such a historic event that I wouldn't be surprised if the internet site crashes, if there are too many people who are trying to get on it. In fact, that's exactly what happened. But I was clever enough that I anticipated this. And I thought, television. Now, the University of Texas has gone beyond television in its digital and high-tech connections. So there was no TV available. So I brought from home my own television, a little black and white TV, 12-inch diagonal, that I bought at Kmart in 1975. And so the room was something like this, longer and narrower, but there was a stage in front. And there was no pitch to the seating, so the seats were all flat. So in order to get the TV up off of or above ground level, I took a table that was maybe about like this, about this high, and I pulled it over on the stage, and that got a little higher, but no, I can do better than that. So I took a folding chair that was over here, and I put a chair on the table, and then I put the TV up on the chair. So here's this little TV screen. The audio was okay. The video was pretty fuzzy. And what made it more interesting was that, as I say, I was going to be interviewed by ABC News. And so they wanted to, I said, okay, I can't talk to you right after the address because I'm going to be in the middle of a class. They said, oh, you're going to be teaching a class. Do you mind if we send a camera crew around to the class? I said, sure, why not? So the ABC camera's rolling, and most of the time they're looking at the students who are looking, they're kind of figuring what in the world we're looking at. They pan around and they see the latest high-tech application at the University of Texas. So anyway, that's how we watched the inaugural address. And I was listening to it with an ear for history. I'm a historian. And I knew perfectly well that Barack Obama's speechwriters would read, well, I knew that they would say, they read all the inaugural addresses of presidents previously. Now, I know perfectly well they didn't, because who ever read the inaugural address of Millard Fillmore? Actually, as I thought about this, and as I reacted to Barack Obama's address, I thought that, please, maybe we should get together on this. That there is a great volume to be written on wonderful presidential speeches that no one ever remembers. Now, the reason I say this is that I'll give you my bottom line conclusion of the inaugural address. And that is, this is what historians always say.